Hi everyone, welcome to my video today. I did a class on Thursday with my beginner students in Burton and we didn't quite manage to finish our painting, so I thought this was a great opportunity for me to show you how I would complete this particular painting. So it's a picture of an old doorway, which is really nice. It's got lots of lovely texture and paving stones. It's nice to have some architecture to paint. We don't often do that. So I've got the basics going on already here, and this is the reference image that we are using. Okay, so there's lots of contrasting colours. As you can see, there's some beautiful texture on the stonework, and I thought it'd be nice to actually show you how I would create that. So we'll get straight started. Okay, so the colours that I have already used on my painting are cerulean blue, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and also some Payne's grey. And I've just mixed up some of the Payne's grey and the burnt sienna in my palette here, and I've tested it on my piece of paper. And if I hold it up for you next to the reference image, it's very close to what I have in the background here. So I'm going to start off by using my round number 8 brush, and I'm looking at the texture I can see on the stones. Now I'm kind of using my brush at the side. It's quite wet actually. With this technique, my brush needs to be not so wet. The bristles are absolutely full of paint because this is a brush I've used to mix up with. The bristles need to be a bit drier, so come into the paint with not quite a wet brush, and I want to get a sort of a dry brush effect building up on the outside of these lovely stones that are surrounding the door there. So by using my brush on its side and scribbling backwards and forwards, it's picking up the texture of the paper. So you've got peaks and troughs on the watercolour paper. I'm using a knot watercolour paper, so it's got a little bit of texture, and that's what this technique is sort of picking up, those peaks on the paper, and it's leaving this lovely texture. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this, continue to use this colour and build up some of this around the stones. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a flat brush, because the bristles on a flat brush are usually a bit firmer, and this is a very cheap brush. It's actually an acrylic painting brush, and so I often use this to scrub away at the paint and to remove areas to lighten them. So it's a good a good thing really to go for something cheap, nice and cheap like this, so you don't spoil your lovely watercolour brushes. But if I show you the reference image again, I've just quickly gone around some of the edges of the stones because they are quite defined in this image. And then I also, at the top here, you can see that in the image there's lots of lighter areas of old plaster and things that are sort of crumbling away. So I want to remove some of this yellow ochre that I have in the background. So I'm going to take my brush and just use a sort of a left and right scrubbing action and dab away with some clean paper towel. And this just lifts that yellow ochre. It's a very pale wash of yellow ochre in the background that we used originally. So it doesn't take too much lifting with this firmer brush. I just want to get some of those highlights in. So I've also lifted some areas at the bottom here on those paving slabs because again there's variations in colour and it stops them from being flat, but also I want to use a little brush now to add in some slightly darker patches. So I'm going to take the yellow ochre and I'm going to add a little bit of Payne's grey just so that it's slightly mucky. If I pop that down on a tester, you can see that that's got a slight tinge to it. Greys it down slightly, stops it from being so vibrant. As you know, these are worn paving slabs, so they need to have some age, and by adding some sort of patches of dark across them, I can use the scrubbing technique again if my paintbrush wasn't too wet. So dab off some paint and then use the brush on the side and pick up some of the texture of the paper. So really working with the paper, that's really helping to create some weathered kind of texture. Can also go into my slightly darker brown, do the same. So we've got some variation in colour on there, not just the one yellow ochre. It's sort of got some tones going on there, breaking it up and giving it a little bit more interest as well. So that has achieved what I wanted it to. Maybe just a little bit on here. There we go. So that's broken the paving slabs up nicely. But if I bring in the reference image again, you can see that there's very, very dark areas in between the paving slabs. So I'm going to add that detail next. So back into this part of my palette, I'm going to start off with some of the burnt sienna. Although I want a dark colour, I don't want it to be thick and opaque. I still want the wash to have a little luminosity to it. So I don't want a thick paint. So I've got quite a watery colour there, and into that some Payne's grey just to darken it up. It's obviously burnt sienna, very red, very warm. So I want to use the Payne's grey, which you might not know, it has quite a lot of blue in there. So it cools this down, gives us a darker tone. And if I just show you there, it's not quite as strong as what I was using on the face of the wall, and it's nice and fluid as well. So it's just going to give me the chance to add some of the darker edges, and like it, I suppose it's the grouting or whatever it is in between these stones, but at the moment it was looking a little bit flat, so this should help to sort of give it more definition, stop it from being so flat, and just overall help the painting really. I don't want to do this everywhere. Just going to pick small sections. So I'd already done a little bit of that on the left here, and now what I've done on the right just balances it out a little bit, carving out some of those edges. Okay, so I think that's enough. I don't want to go overboard with that. So that's helping the foreground a lot. I've now got some texture going on the stonework. Actually, I'm just looking down here. This is very, very flat, so I'm just going to add some more of that kind of dry brushing, scumbling technique to this section down the bottom. This is like a large stone. I had some highlights, but now I've also got shadows texture going on there, so that's better. And looking at the painting overall, it's grounded nicely. We've got some lovely blues on the door, but what I haven't painted so far is the details of the door. So I need to put in it's got a lock section here. So I'm going to take, if I show you what I mean on the reference image, it's got this panel of wood and with a brass key lock there. And it's also got these like brass or metal handles, door handles, so I need to add that to the painting. I've got a very fine pale outline of that going on, so I can just about see that. You probably won't see it on camera, but it is there. So I've got my cerulean blue here, and actually I'm going to just define the edges of these shapes. So some of the cerulean blue on my paintbrush, and I'm just using a number 4 round Da Vinci Casaneo brush, and I can get a nice tip to this brush point, so I can come in and put some cast shadows around where that wooden section is protruding in front of the door, and it will just define that shape. And we've got a bit of a shadow behind it here as well. There's not much of a shadow at the top, but what I'm going to do is it is quite pale at the top. So to define that edge, I'm going to take my damp flat brush and I'm going to give it a highlight at the top. And there's also some wood texture on there, so just pull out a few of those highlights, dab that off with my paper towel, and now we can see it sort of created that shape for me nicely. Do the same over on that section. So that's pulled that forward, which is just what we wanted to do. So next I'm going to work on the handles. I'm going to just grey this down a little bit with some Payne's grey into that cerulean blue. So I'm getting more of a grey tone. I'll just show you on there, slightly grey, not quite as bright as what I've just painted there, and a little bit of water. Bring my brush to the point again by twisting it in the palette, and I just need to come close and see Right, just take off. If you get a blob of paint, too much paint in the area, just dab it off with a paper towel. But I'm using a tiny bit of paint to add the shadows that are around the shape. So this is just effectively negative painting, because, you know, I'm not painting the shape itself, I'm painting around it to bring that shape out. Just drag some of that blue down. Okay, so that's pulled that shape out nicely. Okay, so now I can see that handle in there. And doing the same to the other one. Pulling out that shadow. So I'm dragging lines down because it's a wooden panel and there is wood grain on the door that I can see. So I'm using that to my advantage and drawing some wood grain kind of coming down from that. Actually, that's fine. I can see quite a bit of wood grain on this side, so I'm just going to paint some of that in. Not exactly as I see it on the reference photo, but I can now move away from the reference photo a little bit. This is a painting in its own right, and what I want to do is actually improve my painting. And I can see that by darkening this shadow a little bit, I'm going to be able to pull out that shape a bit more. It's not quite dark enough. I might add in some wood grain to this section of the door. Try and balance things out a little bit. There's also shadow that I haven't painted in yet down this left hand side, so just add that in. This is sticking with the same kind of grey blue, so it's the cerulean blue and a tiny bit of Payne's grey as well. Now there's another section just here, it's like a block of wood down on the door there, and actually I think it's set into the door, whether it's a repair or something, I don't know, but I'm going to get some brown and make the inside of that nice and dark. And bring some of that dark brown. I hadn't quite finished off this effect at the bottom of the door here, so there's a lot of the paint's worn away at the base of the door, and it's revealing sort of rotted wood in there. So using the darker brown that I mixed earlier, adding it to the very bottom, and then what I'll do is wet my brush, go into the yellow ochre and drag some of that brown up from the base up into the wood around it. Let's go back to the brown, darken it up a little bit more. So it's a very rough edge at the bottom of this door here. I've no idea how old this door is, but it's quite clearly ancient. And it's really nice to paint aged things. It's interesting, things that aren't quite perfect. I find this quite interesting. So just darkening and pulling out that line at the bottom of the door there, just to define it a little bit more. I think that's better. What else do I need to do? So I've painted the outline, if you like, of the door handles, but now what I'm going to do is just bring in some of that yellow ochre a little bit of water. My brush is quite dry, so let's get yellow ochre there. And it should have dried enough, yes it has, for me to infill those sections now. So I'm going to start off with the yellow ochre and just paint flat colour in those shapes. And then I'm going to allow that to dry and go back into it with some dark brown and create the little textured, you know, it looks like they've been hammered brass shapes there. So we'll bring that in with the dark brown after. I didn't draw in the lock, but I can paint it in. It's a really unusual shape. It's like a teardrop shape around there. So I don't want to highlight that too much. I don't want to draw too much attention to that. Let's just dab it out a little bit. Let that dry and we'll add those darker sections. And then looking at what I've got so far, I think what I need to do is I need to strengthen the shadows around the door. So yeah, let's get some of the Payne's Grey and do a glaze on what I already have. So this Payne's Grey is, you know, there's a lot of water in that. It's quite thin. And I'm going to use that to strengthen up this section, the darkest section of the shadow. So just going to go in on dry paper, paint a glaze, pulling that grey down. And while that's damp, have I got any paint on this brush? Yeah, I've still got brown on that brush. So I'm just going to take my damp flat brush and tickle the edges of what I've just painted to enable them to fade in to the background, so that I don't get any hard lines there. So dragging this grey colour down a little further. Actually, let's use a stronger grey right at the top here. Really get some darks going. The contrast really is what makes this image so appealing to me. So if you don't go to town with the contrast, I don't think it's going to work. So there we go, that's much stronger. Now I'm just going to drag some of that dark down with my damp brush. I'm using the brush on its side actually because it's a flat brush, and I'm just tickling those edges. Because it's still damp there, I'm happy to go back into it and layer a little bit more paint while it's still damp, and it'll blend into what I've got. So that's darkened that up quite nicely. I think I need to carry that along on the left here. So here you have the finished painting. I'm really pleased with it actually. I think the contrast has worked really beautifully across the old wooden door. We've managed to pick out textures in the stonework and the crumbling plaster, and actually having the paving stones in the foreground sort of leads you into the painting really nicely, and it gives it some grounding, so I think it's worked really well. If you've enjoyed this video, there is another video you might like that I posted last week. It's a step-by-step tutorial, and I take you through everything you need to know about how to paint this lovely squirrel, guys. So yeah, this was one that I recorded for my class, and unfortunately the venue, we had a hiccup at the venue and had to send everybody home, and rather than them not painting that week, I did a video of this squirrel for them to do in their own homes. So if you want to check that out, I'll put a link at the end of the video. It shows you techniques of how to use a salt resist to create this lovely pattern in the background. I also show you step by step how to create the hairs across the body of the squirrel. And another aspect of it was working in layers, you know, being patient, working up those layers to create that effect. And then we used a flat brush to create the texture on the branch there too. So hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've learned something from it, do consider subscribing to my channel so that you'll be notified every time I upload a new watercolour painting video. Take care guys, I hope to see you soon.